All right, we should be live now.
Thank you. Thanks, Prabhu. And Hare Krishna, Dhira Govinda Prabhu, thank you so much for making the time to call us. Hopefully, it's not too much of an imposition.
I appreciate the invitation. Thanks for contacting me.
As we discussed just in our initial setup, this is all about creating greater awareness in the society of what it means to run an effective child protection function. And taking stock, I suppose, of where the society is, how it's generally responded to child protection issues, what still needs to be done. I reckon you might be providing more of a historic perspective. Perhaps you can introduce yourself, because you were just sharing with me a couple of minutes ago that you founded the child protection function within ISKCON in the late 90s. So perhaps give us a little bit of background, who you are and how you came to set up the child protection office.
Okay. All right. Well, yes. So, I was actually going back to the early 80s. I have experience in counseling and counselor training and different social services. And that was before I came to Prabhupada's movement. And then, anyhow, skipping a few chapters, I spent several years in the Middle East, especially Israel, and I came back to the States in late 1990. And then I came to the Electuary in 92. Starting in 93, I was employed by the state of Florida in different capacities as a children and family counselor in the Department of Foster Care, as a social work supervisor for a team with Children's Medical Services. And then starting in 1995, there were different kind of local cases connected with the devotee community related to child protection, suspected child maltreatment. And so I was also starting to serve on the board of directors of ISKCON of Alachua at that time. And so the devotees would call me in. And so I was dealing with some local cases. And early in 1998, there was a high-profile local case involving a high-profile devotee in a position. And so I was very involved with that in January 1998. Also around that time, there was a lot of, there was a lot of voices being heard. And, for many years already, the Guru Kuli newsletters were talking about, the reports of child maltreatment over the years. And then there was threats of the lawsuit. Okay. So it was early March of 1998. I get a call at my home. And it was from Badri Narayan Das, who now I believe is a Swami. And he said, well, you don't know me and I don't know you, but your name came up because I wasn't involved on the international scene of the movement. I was involved locally in North America a bit. And he said, because we're GBC, we're forming an international child protection office, and your name came up from many people as, to be the director. And I said, oh, okay, interesting. So anyhow, so then I accepted the service. And it was early April of 1998. We officially opened the office. The secretary of the office was Ijya Das Prabhu, also known as Eric Johnson. And so we opened the office early in April, and then things got going quickly. Once it was known around the movement that there's a child protection office, we got lots of emails and phone calls, and we could see that there was a real eagerness, that something responsible needed to be done here, or just the voices needed to be heard, cases, pain, therapy. And so, okay, so that's some history. Starting in early 97, again, there was a lot of pressure to do something. That was around when Children of Krishna was formed. So early in 97, the GBC formed a task force for child protection. I was not on it, I wasn't involved. And the task force came out with recommendations to form a child protection office, and the GBC accepted the recommendations and funded the office with some substantial funding starting early in 1998. The task force, again, I was not on that task force. From my point of view, that task force did an excellent job. They did an excellent job. And then after that, there were reviews of the task force guidelines and different suggestions to refine it. And probably some here like Sanika would know more than me about the history, especially over the past 15 years of the different task force reports and the official CPO manual like that. And then, so we got going. And then I served as director of the Child Protection Office. We officially incorporated in 1998 as the Association for the Protection of Children as a nonprofit entity in the state of Florida. We were known as the ISKCON International Central Office of Child Protection. And I served as director till June 2004, so a little over 6 years. There is so much I could say about those times. And even, especially in the first 7 to 8 years after I left that service, still many devotees, many members of Prabhupada's movement, Vaishnav youth, parents, they continued to contact me. And even today, at least 2 or 3 times per year, I'll still get contacted. So there's lots I could say, and I just kind of welcome you to kind of direct me wherever you want me to go in this conversation.
Absolutely. And Shamika, I'd like you to unmute yourself if you're still muted, because you may also want to chip in with some questions or some comments at any stage. Why don't I give you the first question, the first comment, and then I'll line up some questions for Prabhu. Or if you'd like a bit of thinking time, I can hear.
I missed what you said, Damodar. Sorry.
Oh, I apologize. I was saying that you may also wish to ask some questions or make some comments at this point. So I just thought I'd pause, see if you wanted to say something. Otherwise, I'll start interviewing
Dhira Govinda, there is a question I wanted to ask you. Because, I know you had a lot of different experiences, meaning on one hand, your child protection office was the one that received while you were the director, the child protection office received more funding than it ever got after you left. It never got anything close to that. I think you were getting $150,000 a year or something like that. And then, so in that sense, it was a huge support compared to what they're getting now. And then with high profile cases, there was a standard protocol oftentimes that there was a lot of interference, obstruction, favoritism, and all those things, which are recurring issues that we've seen over the years while you were in office and after you left, even some recent cases. I wanted to ask you something more, how do you say, your view on it's something that I have been trying to get my head around. I remember at one point you sent me an email with the article that Srila Bhaktisiddhanta wrote called "The World Stands in No Need of a Reformer." And then there is another article from Srila Bhaktisiddhanta where he says that in Kali Yuga, the best method for the propagation of the truth is the method of opposition, which is the one that basically you expose what is untrue. So these two seemingly contradictory concepts, both presented by Srila Bhaktisiddhanta Saraswati Thakur. I have been trying to tackle, really get my head around, because on one hand, there is a social responsibility to do something. On the other, Krishna is in control. I'm not the doer. What's your view on this? If you could just share something on how you see this.
Okay, thanks for that. Okay, so different quotes from Srila Bhaktisiddhanta, illuminating different aspects of Vaishnav precept. And you're saying like they're apparently contradictory, and you're asking for my perspective. Yes. Yes. So, okay. So, Om Purnamadaha Purnamidam Purnam Mudachyate Purnasya Purnamadaya Purnameva Vashishyate. Everything is perfect and complete, including the world, the material sphere. We could say, well, this, whoever wrote Ishopanishad hasn't seen the world recently. It doesn't seem perfect and complete to me. So, yeah. So my understanding is like, yeah, that like everything, including all the disturbances and the corruption and our own propensity for cheating and mistakes and et cetera, right? And all these, there's all sorts of viciousness. So it's like, well, it doesn't seem heavenly to me. Obviously not. So my understanding is that like, yeah, everything's perfect. It's a perfect everything, from my own mind to body to my circumstances. Everything's a perfect and complete arrangement for my self-realization, for my realization that trying to be happy, satisfied, fulfilled within the material context is like a fish trying to be happy outside of water. Everything's a perfect and complete arrangement for the self to turn towards itself in a spirit of self-discovery, and to turn towards God, Krishna, in a spirit of loving devotion. And everything's designed perfect and complete. There's no mistake. That's one aspect. And then the other aspect, which for me is complementary, although it can appear contradictory, the other aspect is we each get to responsibly look at what's my service. What's my service? And maybe, right, so the world stands in no need of any reformer. Means like, let's not think that by so-called rearranging the chairs on the deck of the Titanic, that by fixing the different context of human nature, then it'll be like utopia. No, this is a place, Mamu Pechi Tukantia Dukalaya Mashashvatam. It's a temporary place full of miseries, like the birth, death, old age, disease, cheating, et cetera, et cetera. That's the nature of material consciousness, and we will attract that. Okay, so the world stands in no need of any reformer, and simultaneously we look at what's my service. So in 1965, the Ishopanishad invocation was completely true and valid. Everything's perfect and complete. And at the same time, Srila Prabhupada knew that it was his service. It was his service to Krishna, to Srila Bhaktisiddhanta, to get on the Jaladuta and cross the Atlantic. And that's not a contradiction, that everything's perfect and complete. And so we need to look at our service. And then in looking at our service, sometimes our service is to shake things up and to expose lies and corruption. Of course, on the foundation of realization, everything's perfect and complete. And my service is to interrupt your thinking, and my service is to expose contradiction and corruption, hopefully with a consciousness of purity of heart and not from my own material ego place. So it's like everything's perfect and complete, and what's my service as an active, dynamic spirit soul?
So I might jump in with a less philosophical question. So excuse me, it's a really hard act to follow there, Shanika. So you said that about exploring a similar question I think you were also asking. You said that in the beginning there was quite a lot of will within the society and the leadership. There was serious backing, and it seemed like they reached out to you to take up this service. Do you feel that was a genuine appreciation of the damage that had been done and the need to sort things out, or was it purely a defensive measure because of things like the Turley case? And because I'm trying to understand why the commitment seems to have slackened since.
Well, from a point of view of organizational leadership, there in 97, 98, to use an expression, their feet were to the fire. Right. They were feeling the pressure in terms of image, in terms of finances, in terms of fundraising. They were feeling the pressure. Okay. So that was, I'm not saying that's good or bad. That's just a fact. That's just a fact. And then as years went on, because even in the 6 years I was there, the funding got less and less as the years went on. And a reason, there's many factors, but a reason for that is they were feeling the pressure less. At some point the Turley case came to resolution, I forget, 2002 or something like that. And okay, so it's generally the way governments and organizations work. Okay, so it's not unique to ISKCON leadership. All right, and then in feeling the pressure, because that can sound somewhat cynical, the feet to the fire. At the same time, in feeling the pressure, many amongst leadership, that did move them to appreciate, wow, we really messed up. We as a group, it did move some of them to appreciate. My basic answer to the question is we got the whole continuum. My experience amongst individual members of those in positions of leadership in the ISKCON organization, where some were just so sincere and grounded and had common sense and responsible in regards to child protection, and for some it was just like maybe a political thing, and I didn't experience much sincerity, and then and so. Yeah, so on an individual basis, I'm not going to generalize. I don't want to paint with too broad a brush.
Yeah. So this is a debate that Shanika and I have had for some time. If pressure seemed to be the thing that catalyzed the initial sense of responsibility and action and commitment and funding, and yet as soon as the pressure seems to come off, then eases up. What's your view about the appropriate way to apply appropriate pressure to keep momentum? Because it does feel like that momentum has maybe not stalled, but yeah, we don't seem to have the momentum that we need to get all the way, sophisticated, mature. Yeah. So what's your thoughts about appropriate application of pressure? Shanika's going to add to this question by the look of it.
Yeah, if I can. I would, Dhira Govinda, you can choose how you, or maybe you can integrate both questions into your answer. I would ask, what do you see as the most appropriate, effective measure to bring about, rather because I feel that Damodar's question is a closed question. He's saying, what's the best way to apply pressure? Whereas I would ask, what do you see as the most appropriate and effective way to bring about lasting social change, change of conscience? To me, it's a problem of consciousness. That's what I see ultimately, collective consciousness. So for me, it's what do you see as the most effective way to bring this about? And obviously, we've got the holy name, it's Kali Yuga, but if there is something more practical, more, what are your thoughts on, however you prefer to answer?
Okay, thanks for that. I don't know. I don't know that I have much practical to add here. What's happening for me in the discussion related to these questions. Again, it's really been like 16 years since I'm organizationally involved. So it's not like I've got my fingers on the pulse organizationally. I'm each year of my life, I feel more and more enthused to support Prabhupada's movement and contribute to it. But as far as the ISKCON organization, I've been quite distant. Again, I'm in touch with many people who come to me for coaching or counseling or take my seminars who do identify as members of the ISKCON organization. And so, the main thing that comes to me is, as you said, consciousness, and encourage, educate, inspire parents to be conscious. Okay, because if we're talking about child protection, then I see it as most vital that parents are not blindly trusting or blindly following. When I say encourage parents to be conscious, I'm not saying parents should not send their children to ISKCON schools. I'm saying whatever parents do, homeschooling, public schools, ISKCON boarding school in India, ISKCON related day school, whatever parents do, that let parents be independently thoughtful, as Prabhupada wanted of all his followers. I'm focusing on parents and all individuals in the society, but I'm focusing on parents. Parents are responsible for their child's protection and education, which means if they give their child to someone for a day or a year, that they check this person out, and I wouldn't recommend like, well, this person has this position, and so I naturally just let the parents develop a personal relationship. And then with parents being conscious, then let that collective consciousness of parents create funding for a child protection office, maybe through the GBC body, maybe through a different fundraising effort, or maybe it takes a dozen of possible different forms. So yeah, and then if there's all sorts of depravity going on and corruption and deception organizationally, then parents can vote with their feet, and it's like either I choose to have nothing to do with you people. This is not my idea of spiritual life. Or the parents can start a reform movement like that. So that's what first comes to me in response to these questions.
Religious organizations, religious leaders in particular, beyond Gaudiya Vaishnavism, seem to struggle more than secular, people. It seems that maybe there's a lot of denial in society in general, but the rest of society, probably from the time where abuse really started the service, the 70s and 80s and so on, has developed a much more swifter response, perhaps less denial. But it seems like religious organizations almost need to be dragged there kicking and screaming. Their initial thoughts are maybe for the reputation of the organization and covering up and misdirected compassion. What do you think that's about? Why is it that religious organizations, including ISKCON, seem to not to know how to properly respond when these things surface?
Thanks for that question, Damodar. Okay, well, a few things come to me. One is, so in the religious, spiritual organizations, which sometimes it might be genuinely religious, genuinely spiritual, sometimes it might be religious and spiritual in quotes, we understand that. Okay, there's this whole concept, and I'm not saying it's a wrong concept, but there's a concept of absolute authority, absolute. And I certainly do believe in absolutes. At the same time, when someone or a group of someone's are taking positions of absolute authority, and their consciousness isn't really fully absorbed with the pure absolute, then that creates, I think, the sort, or at least it contributes to the sort of dynamic that you're speaking about. Whereas, maybe in certain in other institutions, there's not the idea of the absolute can't be questioned, and it's not just for those in the positions of authority, but others are kind of like, the whole mentality of like, if I even say something about what my intuition is saying and this creepy thing that seems to be going, if I even say something, it means I'm offensive. So I think we'll tend to get more of that in organizations that are or meant to be, religious or spiritual. But I can't even speak because this is God. Like I'm opposing God if I even speak up, and so it creates so much of a culture of fear and repression, which of course is the complete opposite of spirituality. But that's the dynamic.
You see a move in consciousness in those 6 years between 98 and 2004, where you felt there was a better collective awareness and a more effective method of responding? You did mention a spectrum earlier, so I was wondering if you felt there was tangible headway or not. My
short answer to that is definitely yes. Mm-hmm. Definitely yes. throughout the world, and especially in some parts where it was really, like some areas of the ISKCON world were really committed to darkness and unconsciousness in this area, and I experienced over 2, 3, 4, 5 years a substantial transformation. It's substantial transformation, not just in individuals, but in communities. And I could talk about details, give examples, but I'm not sure if that's what we're doing here. But so yes, that the efforts worked. The efforts worked. They were transformational, individually, collectively. I'm not saying it became like paradise, not at all, but definitely substantial transformation in an auspicious direction. Yes.
So just to clarify on the not providing details, I wanted to give you the assurance that we weren't going to try and squeeze information out of you about specific cases or put anyone on trial or anything. But it's completely up to you. If you felt it was helpful to provide an example, we're certainly not going to edit you out in terms of being able to do that. And sometimes the illustrations, do actually help something become a lot more tangible for folks. So completely your decision around that.
Well, first of all, I mean, I've written about everything. I've written about anything, and my writings are public in my annual reports of the Child Protection Office. In this book, it's a book published by Columbia University Press in 2004. I published an article on the history of child protection, child abuse in the ISKCON movement. I've published a lot, different internet articles over the years. So I've written about specific cases and general trends and causes and effects. So I'm not shy to do that when it's my service to do so.
Yeah.
Okay, we can take. Okay, I would say, based on my experience, the worst, let's say the most severe child maltreatment in the history of ISKCON, I'm going to say was definitely Mayapur, late 70s through early 90s. Okay, and even there in I'm going to say late 80s, I think was 91. I have it written, but that's what 91. There was actually an investigation. And considering that in 91, they had very little resources and training, and the investigation was done was led by 4 devotees. And I read their report when I assumed directorship of the CPO in 98, and they did an excellent job. I was very impressed with what they did. And then they made recommendations, and their recommendations were followed for about 2 months, and then things kind of slipped back, and this was the whole thing. And so Mayapur, there was a real culture that supported child maltreatment, sexual, physical neglect, emotional. There was a real culture, a generational culture that supported it. And I would say, if the case files on Mayapur were to just be given to, let's say, a child protection investigator in Auckland or New York or somewhere like that, then they would just say, well, it looks quite clear that this is a ring of child sex abuse. That's what they would say. And again, I've written, this isn't like the first time I'm revealing this. I've written about this for more than 20 years. Okay, and then at the same time, I can say, so I went to Mayapur 4 years in a row. I went there 99, 2000, 2001, 2002. And our team, we really spent a lot of energy, not just when we were there, but also from a distance. And I could say, when I went there in 2002, the culture in regards to treatment of children not just in terms of like gross ways, but even in terms of like as they're walking along, patting them on the backside, or just stuff like that. Just, you know, that culture was practically eliminated. And not just, you know, when I was there, but like, you know, based on reports I've heard from reliable people. So from 98 through 2002, that's one community where there was a substantial transformation. And I want to qualify that. Substantial transformation, it doesn't mean like they became like America, because substantial transformation, which means, because there is a context in that community of Bengali culture, you know, so that's it's always understood that what is clean and proper, we do take cultural considerations into consideration. So I'm just using that as one example, and then I will say, unfortunately, that after, and I've written articles about this like that, but after I left the Child Protection Office in 2004, I would say from about 2005, for several years thereafter, I began to get reports from really worried and concerned parents and just other members of Prabhupada's movement about how, from their perception, what was happening in that community was slipping back to the pre-98, even the pre-91. And I did some, I'm going to call it informal investigation, and I was very distressed by what I found or what I didn't find. So, okay, I've shared some details there.
Thank you. I might invite Shanika to line up another question, but just a small one. So when you talk about a culture in which abuse can actually thrive to some extent, what would some of the hallmarks of a culture like that look like? So what should people be on the lookout for, I guess?
Okay. All right. So that there's parental involvement, minimal or none, and not encouraged and even discouraged. Okay. And culture of there's no real, when I say real, I'm not saying what's official in the books. There's no real channels for speaking up safely, culture of denial in some of these instances I'm referring to in that community through what I discovered even in fairly recent years, certainly till a decade ago. Denial to the part where it's like crazy making, like just like this isn't some subtle nuance that you're missing. This is like really like warped denial. Yeah. Okay. For example, like I just told you, like, you know, the files from pre-91. Okay. And then, so I got some report. And so some members of Prabhupada's movement asked me to contact some people involved in child protection there. And in my letter, I said, well, you know, I'm particularly, I wrote, and again, I published all this, so I can send you copies or whatever. But I wrote, well, based on what I've heard, you know, I'm concerned, especially considering the history of child abuse and maltreatment in that community, Mayapur. So the response I got back, again, from persons meant to be leaders in child protection there, the response I got back was, and this is maybe a slight paraphrase, but essentially was, what history of child abuse in Mayapur? And it gets worse from there. Now, I'm hoping that what I'm sharing there has no bearing on any reality in 2020. My concern is that it does. But so, you know, just culture of bluff, denial, smoke screens, smoke and mirrors, that those sorts of responses or non-responses. Of course, education for the children, basic education for the children. So those are a few things to be conscious of.
Annika, did you have a question?
Not really a question. I just wanted to, expand on what Dhira Govinda was sharing. So Dhira Govinda gave a picture of starting from the 70s to 2000 something. And also he was, you were talking about the, how they discourage signs. What did you say, Damodar? Concerning signs.
Yeah.
So in Mayapur, there is the problem hasn't improved. Okay, I think there have been improvements, but they still have a huge problem. So there is a devotee there who has been looking after child protection to some degree. He's made some efforts, and he was physically attacked. They sent him to the hospital. So that's the you're not going to want to. That's kind of quite. How do you say? It's a strong deterrent. So after the cost of silence, the first cost of silence came out, one of the big focuses of that video was Bhaktivedanta Purna Maharaj's involvement with the Mayapur Gurukul. He has a history that is spanning 40 years at least with the Mayapur Gurukul, the repeated counts of personal involvement in child abuse with girls, with boys, like the full spectrum, and no, not the full spectrum, but very extensive. And he was still in charge of the Mayapur Gurukul. And after the video came out, there was an uproar, a lot of pressure. And so then there was, some people said that it was a big achievement. They moved him out of the Gurukul. To me, it's a cosmetic fix. It's not, nothing substantial changed. The school, so what used to be called Gurukul, it's no longer allowed to be called Maharaj's Gurukul. People still call it Maharaj's Gurukul, even though he is not residing there. He does go there for functions. The school is run by his disciples and his students, former students. And there is no independent child protection presence overseeing the school. And there have been very few reports of child abuse coming out of there in the last 10 years. I hope it's because there are no incidents. And I'm not saying that there are, because I don't know. What concerns me is that there is no, the history is terrifying. It's really bad. And having a school like that, that is still affiliated with Maharaj still has a huge influence on that school. And a school like that doesn't have an external, visibly and clearly independent child protection supervision, it's not just unacceptable, it's reckless, it's risky, it's just, it's really bad. Anyway, that's... I
may be able to get an update. As you know, there's a couple of other people that we have in the pipeline for interviews. So let's see if we can find out if there's genuine progress been made. It's kind of distressing to hear that Mayapur would probably be the worst, because I'm probably less familiar with reports of Mayapur, but I am familiar with some horrific incidents in the Vrindavan Gurukul. So to think that something was worse than some of the beatings and so on that went on there is truly shocking.
Yeah, Mayapur was a lot worse. And what happened? I mean, Sana can course, grew up in Vrindavan Gurukul, so Sanika has first-hand experience. Well, what happened as a general dynamic is, okay, for generally speaking, so those who, were the children in the Vrindavan Gurukul, a large percentage of them, they were from the West. They were from the West. And so when they grew up, there was, relatively a culture of stand up for your rights and speak the truth. Relatively speaking, a large percentage of those who were in the Mayapur Gurukul, late 70s, 80s, early 90s, they were like from the villages of Assam and Bengal and like that. I remember one interview I did was in 1999, and you're right. So he was maybe already in his early 30s, but in the 80s he was in the Mayapur Gurukul, and he told me directly, if I speak to you, then very likely next week my mother is drowned in the Ganges.
Well,
yeah, I mean this was common. Whereas speaking to those who grew up in the Vrindavan Gurukul when they were young adults, there was more like a willingness or even a readiness to be forthcoming. But like what I just said, it's kind of shocking, but that's status quo. That was status quo for the Mayapur investigations.
Sorry.
Yeah, go on.
We've last week interviewed a current CPO officer here in Australia, and we are hoping to have others who are currently serving, as you say, because historic perspectives are certainly still important in terms of getting a handle on this issue. But it's hard to get a grip then on has the society really progressed or not, and it doesn't sound like it's progressed, certainly to the extent that any of us would like. What was it that sort of transpired around 2004 that made you want to pass the baton or terminate that service or whatever? What are circumstances, if you're comfortable sharing them?
Yeah, I'm glad to share. Okay, sure. One thing, just to backtrack a few minutes, in April '99, I wrote and published it's called it's a report on the Bhaktivedanta Gurukul in Mayapur. And so, because early in '99, I personally had some extensive interviews with Bhakti Vijayapurna Swami, and we recorded them. And so if any of your listeners are interested, maybe that report exists online somewhere. If not, they can write me an email, and I'm glad to share that report. And I think that report will shine a lot of light on just what Sanika was sharing.
Yeah.
And that report was 22 years ago. And when I say shine a lot of light, I don't think that anyone who reads that report will breathe any sighs of relief, maybe just the opposite. But if someone wants to be educated, it's probably important reading. So
is there a place online where that people could reliably see things that you've written, articles or
as far as child protection writings, I don't know. They were all posted online in '98, 2001. I don't know what exists now.
If they're still there, yeah.
Yeah, but I have them all in my files, and I'm glad to send them. I can send them to you. Sonic has seen all of them, but I'm glad to share them. Maybe they exist online somewhere.
We'll probably get some chat on this video on the Facebook group, and so we'll direct people if they wish to approach you. I don't want to just give out your email address necessarily willy-nilly, but yeah, thank you for that kind offer. So sorry, you were about to get into the circumstances of
Okay, so first of all, so child protection, again, I served as director for more than 6 years. Prabhu and I established the office early in '98. And in one sense, it was a very nasty service, as you might imagine. But it was not a thankless task, actually. Whereas practically from the first weeks, there were some persons in some places, or even many, they wanted to get rid of me pretty quick. But also all around the world, there were so many devotees who appreciated what we were doing. So it was not a thankless task, whether it was youth, parents, rank and file devotees, temple devotees. We got a lot of appreciation for what we did, whether it was the investigations, the adjudications, the grants. We had a grant program, the therapeutic services, the resources. So I so much appreciated the opportunity to serve Prabhupada and his followers in that service. Okay, then, all right. Then as in one sense, as the years went on, more and more, in order to do the service, I was needing to spend time to respond to different political manipulations and behind the back maneuvers to try to portray this, and sometimes outright lies and distortions. And I can write letters to in a nuanced way like this, and like kind of different political opposition within the leadership of the organization, opposed to simply what we were doing. And one thing I want to say, in my efforts with the Child Protection Office, the different cases, I was never out to get anybody. If it was some devotee that no one ever heard of, or if it was an initiating guru, for me it was all the same. If there was allegations, I was equally inspired and ready to find evidence that would acquit as to find evidence that would convict. Okay, still, certainly a organizational difficulty was if there were cases that dealt with either high profile people or people who were close friends with high profile people, then it got into all this, just dark, ugly, twisted political manipulations. And I didn't mind being personally attacked. Again, I got lots of appreciation from some sectors, lots of criticism from other sectors. But just as the years went on, and it just became more and more, my service was about that, and less around like directly serving, helping the youth, and grants to help the youth. And even some of you, Sonika knows our Safetov programs. Actually, the Safetov, also you, Damodar, the foundation seminar from the tent in 2004. And so the Safetov Advanced Seminar was particularly designed to support and serve Vaishnav youth who were maltreated as children within the organization. So for me personally, I could have continued. I'm going to say they, mean increasing numbers amongst those in leadership in ISKCON. They wanted me out. Not everyone, but for the most part, they wanted me out, even starting in '98, and that increased. And it was very difficult for them to get me out, because what we were doing was really appreciated by so many members of Prabhupada's, not just members of Prabhupada's movement. We have we have statements from top lawyers in the field of child abuse cases, social workers, therapists, who say that what this ISKCON Child Protection Office is doing, this is a model for the world. This is the model for churches of the world. And for that, that original task force that formed in '97, I appreciate them. They created a very strong template. And then, then I got to kind of fill in, give the template hands and legs. But non-devotee professionals from all sectors were appreciating what we were doing. Devotees were. So it was difficult for those members of leadership who wanted me out to get me out. But it came to the point where, because of different factors that I've explained, that I came to the point where, like, I got clear. It's time for me to bring this chapter to closure, and to direct those energies to serve Prabhupada's movement, including the youth and children and families of Prabhupada's movement in some other forms.
And when you talked about the sort of opposition you felt, or the political machinations, or even you used the term "get rid of you" and so on. Again, up to you how much detail you get into, but could you just sort of take us through what forms did those take? You mentioned it was ugly. Was it just nasty accusations along the lines that you've mentioned? Was there a whole, politicizing and campaigning against you? What did it look like?
There was all of what you said. Okay, in my 2004 annual report, which was the last annual report I wrote, I have a section there called Culture of Accountability. And I think a lot of what I write in that section responds to your question. And that was it, because in one sense, I lost some inspiration to do the investigations and adjudications because, again, some members of ISKCON leadership, they were very responsible and, in these terms, but there was no systemic, but there was appallingly little systemic culture of accountability. And so we could go through a whole investigation and adjudication, but then again, if it was like a friend of someone in an influential position, then it could be summarily disregarded, things like that. And so more and more, like, I just want to spend my time to directly create healing therapy for the youth. And so I could have stayed, and I just decided it's time for me to move on.
Well, I think we should move the conversation to that healing side, but I was going to say, Shanika may have another point just before we do that.
Hi, Dhira. Something I've struggled with a lot is the offense aspect of my crusades and campaigns, and it's something that has troubled me a lot. I have often felt that whether I spoke or remained silent, damned if you do, damned if you don't. There is no, and then you have, we have Bhagavad Gita verses like Apiched Sudaracharo in the Bhagavad Gita.
Yeah.
And then with that verse, it's, it speaks about if it's an accidental fall down and the devotee rectifies, then he's considered to be perfect, something along those lines. So to me, when I read that verse, the case of Lokanath Maharaj comes to mind. As far as is known, he's had one fall down. He obviously was quite serious because he's an initiating guru. He was an initiating sannyas, initiating guru at the time, but he hasn't had any. So from the devotee philosophy perspective, you would say he has rectified and he is perfect. I don't know how. But then socially, from a social perspective, this sounds like ludicrous, brainwashed cult talk. So what's your view on that?
Okay, well, first, my view, I don't see a contradiction here because there's different perspectives, and there's the personal, there's the societal, and so okay, you named Lokanath Maharaj in particular, and that was, I had several personal talks with Lokanath Maharaj back when I was serving, as director of the office, and I appreciate him, very much. In one sense, I felt bad for him because, from my perspective, very clearly, organizational leadership was trying to manipulate him because he was like a poster boy for the Prabhupada centennial, and then the accusations came out. And so the Lokanath Maharaj case was the one case that the GBC told me, do not touch this case, which was difficult because I would get letters by saying like, well, what, he's a sannyasi, he's a guru. And then I would say, well, okay. So, and I wouldn't hide things. I would say, GBC told me not to touch that case. And I do have the reports from before 98 and like that. And so And my experience with it, the way the GBC tried to protect and hide and conceal and bluff, which they did in that case, it made things so much worse and more painful for Lokanath Maharaj. What to speak of the girl and the girl's family. Okay, now I'm not talking about Lokanath Maharaj here, but for me, like, okay, so philosophically, that's true. Someone can commit the most abominable action, Apisat Sudracho, Vajanti Mama Nanyaba, Sadareva Samantavya, Samyag Vyavasito Kisa. Someone commit the most abominable things, and then they really learn from it, and they actually become rightly situated, and they're actually have saintly consciousness. That's true. I mean, it's one. So that particular verse, of course, has been misused, abused, badly applied. There's a statement from Saint Augustine who said, never judge a philosophy by its abuse. So that verse is philosophically true, and it's been badly abused. And here's the thing, even if it's a case where it's true, someone did such and such, maybe severe child maltreatment, and then maybe they really do become rectified and apologetic and remorseful and really serving with humility and gentleness. Even if that's true, maybe the person is now saintly, and simultaneously maybe he belongs in prison. That's not a contradiction.
Yeah.
That's not a contradiction. Like I might regard someone, yeah, he did this terrible transgression against children. He really does seem rectified, and he belongs in prison. There's just no contradiction. But organizationally, it would be, oh, he's saintly now. He chants his rounds. So if you say anything about him, you're offensive, and that becomes the whole denial, bluff. It becomes the whole using Vaishnav etiquette as a wall, as a hammer to prevent honest communication. Srila Rupa Goswami, he talks about exchanges of affection between persons dedicated to self-realization. He describes Guyam Akiti Prichati, which means in a true Vaishnav culture, there's safety to share one's heart and mind confidentially and to inquire confidentially. And that's a hallmark of a true spiritual relationship and community. And so if the culture is more one of fear and repression, it's not to protect Prabhupada's movement. It's a violation of the spirit of Prabhupada and spirit of Srila Rupa Goswami. So, but Vaishnav etiquette is meant to enhance that culture of a safe place to inquire and share. I've taught these, what we call transformative communication workshops, well, in the devotee community since 1995. And I remember some workshops, anything from 2 hours to 10-day intensive, with that. And but so back in the day, I was mostly conducting them within the devotional communities, and I would sometimes quote, Rupa Goswami, a safe place to share the heart and mind confidentially, and then participants would say, David or Dhira Govinda Das, this devotee community is the last place in the world where I'd want to share my heart confidentially. And everyone would laugh, because if we don't laugh, we cry.
So I'll make one point for viewers, and then I'll ask you another question before we transition to the healing aspect, because I do think that work that you do in that space is a really important theme to bring out here as well. So I don't want to lose that. So the point that this is the first time, I think, in any of our clips that we've actually named names. And I anticipate two kinds of responses to that. One will be lots of accusations of inappropriateness or whatever. And there may also be people who want to dig for details. I'm not sure exactly how to do that, but we'll see how we handle all of that in the comments. One theme that often comes up is the GBC's funding and even appointing and potentially firing of CPO directors, potentially creates a conflict of interest. You mentioned that in a particular case, you've received explicit directives, do not touch this case. I wonder if you had a view about that. Should the society be funding it? Should we seek another? Is there an active conflict of interest? How do you resolve it in this case? Because clearly the GBC need to somehow be listening to whoever they have in that office, but it also seems that they also may interfere or abuse that authority, that appointment, hiring and firing kind of role. So
yes, yeah. Well, thanks for that question, Don. But again, I'm not in contact with the organization for many years.
Yeah,
maybe with some individuals I am on occasion. Yes, and so that and that was, when the task force report got reviewed for the first time, 98, 99, that was one of the potential flaws in the system, that the GBC had too much influence in the appeals process, and just too much influence, and then it became cronyism. And yeah, it was clear that that if there were high profile cases that dealt with direct leadership or friends of leadership, then the GBC could get involved and just shut down the judicial system. So so that I don't know where things stand now. I don't know where things stand. I mean, I for many years, since she started, and how many years it is, but I'm in contact with Leela Suka, who directs the child protection activities for ISKCON North America. And I'm always very inspired to support and help her, because I really appreciate her sincerity, and she's gentle yet bold. And so, she's in North America. I do know Gandhar Vika, since I think she was at our Italy child protection training in 1999, going way back. And I recently, last year, I met Kamlesh. So these all seem, like caring, responsible people to me, like that, based on my experience. Leela Suka, I have a lot of experience of. And so based on what I'm hearing, it sounds like there should be more separation of powers. Should, when I say should, it means probably be more effective for child protection if there were more separation of powers. That's my sense.
How to achieve that, and how to ensure that the GBC therefore sort of respect whatever that a CPO that is separate would actually put forth.
I don't know. The first thing that comes to me is not a very encouraging response, maybe, but what first thing comes to me is, just like parents, should cultivate a culture where they're just like not dependent on this international or local GBC bodies for their children's protection. If they are dependent, it's probably a bad idea.
So let's go to the work that you do to help people who've been victims of abuse to heal, to put their lives back in some kind of functional order, and to, I guess, minimize the damaging impact. Maybe we could even start with, what kinds of impacts does this have on a person? And then how do you mitigate those? What are the practical ways that someone could repair in some ways?
Yeah. Okay. Well, practical impacts that one's sense of regard for oneself, one's sense of low self-esteem. Now, in saying this, I'm not talking about healthy Vaishnav humility. Like in healthy Vaishnav humility, we don't see ourselves as advanced, and there's examples like Krishna's Kaviraj Goswami saying he sees himself as like a low worm stool. on the Jaladutta, Prabhupada wrote, he sees himself as having no knowledge and devotion. But that's not low self-esteem or low self-worth. That's very empowering humility. But I'm talking about sort of low self-esteem that will lead one to treat themselves like trash, to treat themselves like trash, and to alienate themselves from true God consciousness. Yes, and okay. And so, this is a big field. Now, of course, and it's not automatic, as we all know, because there could be someone who is a victim of severe child maltreatment, child sexual abuse, and then some go on to abuse other children when they grow up. And some who experience the same severity of maltreatment, they become a champion to prevent child abuse. So it's not just like those factors automatically mean that someone will become this or that. Okay, but generally speaking, there are different difficulties and problems that one has, when they enter into adult life. For maybe not all. Some can be abused and they just process it in a healthy compartment, and they go on and live healthy lives. That's possible too, and I've seen that. And as I said, we developed the advanced seminar, which is for graduates of the foundational seminar, specifically for those who experience maltreatment within this kind of organization. And actually, when Sonika organized the foundational advanced seminar at the Jiva Institute in Vrindavan in 2009, he brought his friends from around the world, many of whom had been through those experiences in these kind of schools. And so I've witnessed, both within devotee communities and outside of devotee communities, hundreds, maybe thousands of examples where profound healing and transformation happens. I've witnessed that, even where they take that very tragic, traumatic event of abuse, and they turn it in such a way where it becomes a positive inspiration in their life. That doesn't mean that they don't want that person to be in prison, right? There's not a contradiction there. Yeah. And so, I can get into what we do, but that's quite intensive and extensive. But it's a combination of deep listening, deep empathy, where all emotions are acceptable. The rage, the hate. Many come to me and they've got anger towards Srila Prabhupada. How could he allow this? And so we give space. We give space for all emotions, all thoughts are acceptable. It doesn't mean all actions are acceptable, but like if someone has a murderous rage, I want to kill that school principal, then that's acceptable. Am I saying that it's okay to go and kill the school principal? No, of course not. So certain actions need to be constrained, but creating a space where all emotions, all resentments, all hatred, all rage, all humiliation, all shame, it's all deeply heard and received and understood. We don't make it right, we don't make it wrong, but we listen. And it is sometimes said that like understanding can be like life air. Just like if I get the wind knocked out of me and I'm gasping for air, you could tell me what a great guy I am. You could offer me a pile of money. It won't matter. I just want air. So sometimes, especially in deeply emotionally charged situations, telling someone they're nice, reassuring them, advising them, preaching to them, it won't help. Especially in emotionally charged situations, sometimes all we want is to be understood. And that doesn't mean agreed with or disagreed with. So that's foundational. That's foundational. And then from that, there's so many other principles. I could go on and on. I don't know where we want to go with this, but that's foundational. Yeah,
and it does sound like that listening, true empathy is the primary ingredient in those early stages. And it does sound like if the right environment is created, even in a relatively short period of time, it's possible. but that's not to say that some people might not yet need years of therapy or whatever, and to fully recover. But it does sound like you designed, based on your professional experience, some processes that often accelerate that healing process, or at least managing of the dysfunction in some ways.
Yeah, and sometimes much more than managing dysfunction. Sometimes,
sorry, those were my words. Yeah.
Sometimes going to really healthy, life enhancing thriving.
Yeah, transformation.
Yeah.
Do you want to chip in?
I participated in Dhira Govinda's 10-day seminar in 2006 in Glastonbury, in England. And for me, it was deeply healing, empowering, transformational. For me, that workshop is it's like my life. There is the before and after. 2006, after the seminar, is when I began to more actively get involved in child protection, and yeah, it's. I'm always grateful to Dhira Govinda for the contribution that was that you have made to my life. Thank you.
Thank you, Simon. Thanks for sharing.
So I'm mindful that we're closing in now on 90 minutes, and I'm quite aware that you may have other things you need to be doing at this time. So Dhira Govinda Prabhu, thank you so much for joining us. I do have a question that's come through on group chat, which may be almost a nice bookend from the first question that Shanaka asked. I'm wanting to ask, how much do you think the impediments to child protection are fueled by misunderstanding the philosophy? Perhaps you've already mentioned some of these, but can you do a summary of the philosophical misconceptions which are implicated? Or is it largely just the frailty of human nature and the organizational structure which is at fault? Yeah, so how much of this is philosophical abuse or misconceptions? You referred to St. Augustine earlier. How much of it is just human weakness and denial and organizational immaturity or whatever?
Well, thanks for that. Well, there's human weakness, human defect, human propensity for cheating, and then or structural systemic failings, which of course any system or structure is made up of human beings with those weaknesses, so that it's all interrelated. It's not separate compartments, the systemic and the individual. And then as far as I would say, like, maybe in the devotee communities, there's sometimes that extra layer of the philosophical misapplications. And again, St. Augustine's quote, never judge a philosophy by its abuse, because then there's also the advantages. Like I can think of, this goes back more than 20 years. I interviewed a young woman, and she was terribly maltreated in her youth in an ISKCON school setting. And, so she really wanted nothing to do with this institution. She was really suffering in her life. And at the same time, she said, and sometimes even though I want nothing to do with Krishna consciousness, I have these Bhagavad Gita verses deep within me, and they're a beautiful source of solace. And so I'm certainly not here to trash the philosophy. The philosophy is beautiful. I endeavor to live my life according to philosophy. So we're talking here about the misuse and abuse of the philosophy. We talked about the Apichet Sudaracha verse. That's a beautiful verse. It's a compassionate verse. And we've given a few examples how it was hopefully not, but maybe still is badly misused in the field of child protection or lack of protection. Yeah, other things like, children are Maya, that sort of thing, rather than children are Vaikuntha children and like that. So yeah, so that's another form of very twisted misunderstanding of the philosophy. So I would say the misunderstanding of the philosophy, twisted misapplication, it kind of reinforces and just adds other layers to the human frailties and systemic shortcomings.
Arjuna, you asked that question, so you may want to come off your mic, and if there's anything else you'd like to ask, you've been patiently sitting in the background.
Oh, the thing I usually think about in relation to the philosophical misunderstandings is the fear of offences or the too much trust placed in leaders. Because in a secular environment, people just know that if somebody breaks the law, there's a system for that. You involve the courts. The rest of the world's figured it out. But we think in a religious institution that we should shelter people from that because they're somehow saintly or something. And we people sort of turn off their intelligence. Yeah.
Thanks, Arjuna.
Yeah, thanks for that. Thanks for that very much. As I said earlier, yes, and maybe not, but let's say hypothetically someone really is saintly, and maybe he belongs in prison. No contradiction there. But for many members of the organization, it might be like that. So yeah, so that's why in practically every, if not almost absolutely every document that the CPO issued, and probably that's still true, but at least in my day, we would have a statement. We recommend that you learn and follow your local laws concerning child maltreatment, child abuse, child neglect, and that you learn them and follow them, meaning that we're not like a separate government within the institution. So whether we were writing to ISKCON leadership or parents or something on the internet, we encourage, we strongly recommend that you learn and follow your local laws regarding child protection and child abuse. Now, at the same time, I'll make a comment here, because sometimes even on like Facebook, sometimes now there's discussion about child protection. I'm not so involved, but I'll notice something. And sometimes, we'll hear something which sounds like nice, but it's simplistic. Like, why don't they report that to the police? It's not such an easy thing. Let me just share what I mean here. That high-profile case early in '98, before I was asked to come and direct the Child Protection Office, it was a high-profile case. It was based here in Alachua, but someone who was known throughout the movement. He was leadership position. He was in a leadership position in education, and anyhow, so I went with one of the victims of his child abuse, who was who was in his early 20s at the time, and something when he was like 11 years old, something. I went with one of the victims that we perpetrated upon, and we went to the Alachua is here in North Florida. We went to the sheriff's office, and the sheriff said, okay, first of all, the sheriff made it clear I had different positions and with ISKCON, whatever. I was chairman of the board of New Raman Reti, whatever. He said, I can't file any complaint. The complaint needs to be filed by the child, who's now a young adult, or the child's parent, because if it happened when the child was a minor. And in that particular circumstance, even though there was at least 4 confirmed victims, none of them or their parents were willing to file, because it would have meant they would need to go to the jurisdiction where the transgression happened, which was like 2,000 miles away, and go back and forth. So when they looked at what it actually meant to file a criminal complaint, none of the children or their parents were willing to do that. And I don't blame them. They have their lives and they have their financial considerations and like that. So even if like there's a well-meaning ISKCON leader, and something happens around the temple or congregation, and so sometimes the ISKCON leaders get criticized. Why don't you go to the police? The ISKCON leader can go to the police, but the police won't take any filing from them. They take it from the victim, or if the victim is a minor, the victim's parent. So I just want to say that, because it can sound nice. Why don't you go to the police? And so that's the system. at least in North America and maybe throughout the world. So I want to make that point.
Thank you. Let's move towards some closing comments. Shanika, any last comments or questions from you before we move to close?
Karma is a favorite one. Oh, it's their karma.
Yeah. Yeah, that's okay. That's a popular term to use to misapply the philosophy. Yes. So okay. Well, are you asking me to comment, or would you like to make a comment?
No, please.
Okay. So, well, I've seen this karma thing used to try to shut people up. It's your karma, don't complain. Okay. So sure. Like for me as an individual, for me as an individual, I know it's helpful to look at, things that happen to me. Yeah, how did I create that? Let me take a look at how maybe I am, maybe in this life or in a previous life, maybe I harmed someone in the same way, and that's helpful for my own process of growth and purification. And it's not for me. Like if a young adult comes to me who was sexually maltreated or physically abused as a child, it's certainly not my role to go, it's just your karma. Okay. At the same time, I found many youth or middle-aged people who were abused as children, and on their own, they get a lot of value from looking at it from a karmic point of view. And when they're doing it in a healthy, responsible way, and again, it's not my role to try to push them there or even to recommend that they go there, but often they go there on their own and they find it very healing. And in that healing, by looking at it from a karmic point of view, they often empower themselves to take a stand and to confront the abuser, which prior to that they weren't ready to do. So again, it's the same thing. Okay, yeah, maybe I harmed someone, maybe I caused pain to someone, and now pain's coming to me. That could be true, and that could be good for my spiritual life to take a look at that. Maybe that's my process, and also my process is to let you know, Mr. or Mrs. Abuser, that what you did is wrong. My process is to file a complaint against the police. Yeah, but it was your karma. Okay, maybe that's none of your business. Yeah, and that's my process, and my role and my service is to protect children from people like you, to make sure that you're behind bars, and there's no contradiction there.
Final comments from me, and then we'll give the final word to you. But massive thank you on two accounts. One, for being so willing to come and join us and for giving of your time so abundantly, and also for the very balanced way in which you've helped inform. Our goal here is educational more than anything else. And so hopefully it's helpful to anyone watching to get a broader understanding of these issues and how they play out. But obviously another massive thank you on behalf of the society, I think in general, that you did pick up this responsibility in the late 90s and drove it, so hard for so long. And I think we have had, from that point, I think it was a recognizable step change. And hopefully it's created enough momentum that even if it still sways from time to time back and forth, as you say, the baton's been passed and there's other people who are carrying it and driving it forward. So massive thank yous on all those counts. Any final words from yourself, Prabhu?
Thank you, Damodar Sanika Arjuna, for giving me this opportunity to share. And I was always honored to do this service for Prabhupada's movement, and I'm honored and very, very grateful for this opportunity. And let's see. Well, I think I started towards the beginning about encouraging parents to be responsible. We related to Arjuna's comment that when I say responsible, I don't mean to be like closed-minded and cynical, not to, you know, to blindly accept authority. That's not Prabhupada's mood. And also to blindly reject our authority. That's no virtue either. So my focus here maybe is so much not even organizational or societal. I'm focusing on the individual, and especially the individual parents. And I appreciate you three as individuals for serving the children of Prabhupada's movement. Thank you. Hare Krishna.
Can I bring up one? I just remember something that's quite important. If I know, Dhira Govinda, you're quite able to be concise. Something that I've really struggled a lot with is there is about maybe 40 or 50 quotes where Srila Prabhupada says, don't hit the children, never hit the children, show the stick. And there's, I think, one quote where Prabhupada says you can beat the child if he's particularly difficult. And I remember I had a few years back, I had an exchange of maybe 4 or 5 public articles with what's the Swami's name? The guy that wrote the book, Women.
Bhakti Vikas
Swami.
Because Swami.
Yeah, so he was really arguing that, the Acharya said that it's okay, therefore there must be a place where it's okay. And what's your take on that?
Okay. Well, first of all, if as far as a particular quote from Prabhupada, I would want to see it. Maybe I have seen it, but like if you want me to comment on a particular quote and what my sense of where Prabhupada's coming from in the context of the totality of his teachings, I would need to look at that quote again in particular context. But okay.
Yeah, I'll just give you the context in a second. It's really, the context is really interesting because there is Jagadish and a number of other 4 or 5 other devotees that really push Prabhupada to allow corporal punishment. And Prabhupada gave at least 13 times. He gave 13 different alternatives, and then in the end he says, "I've told you what I want, but if you..." Then he what's the word, English word? He acquiesced in the end. He says, "I've told you what my preference is, but you do as you like." And then he says, if he's bad, you can give him a good beating. So so he did say that there are other preferences, and then he also did say, go ahead and do it.
Okay, I know we're coming too close, so I'll share concisely my thoughts. I'll share it in the form relatively quickly of a story. This is an interview I conducted in 1998. I conducted this interview in 1998 with a Vaishnava youth. He was maybe about 30 years old at the time. And this Vaishnava youth, he was at the Vrindavan Gurukul. And so like his mother joined somewhere in the 70s, and he was 5 years old. His mother joined before he was born. And then somewhere, I believe it's in 77, his mother sent him to the Vrindavan Gurukul. She was in Chicago. So he described for me, I'm interviewing him in 1998. And he described, of course, he felt homesick for his mom, this and that, of course. And he said that his experience in Vrindavan was very sweet, very sweet. It was just very loving, sweet. And the director of the Gurukul, the principal, was Dr. Sharma. Prabhupada put Dr. Sharma in charge. My understanding is Dr. Sharma was not even a disciple of Prabhupada. Maybe, I don't even know if he was a Vaishnava, maybe, but Mayavadi. But he was an elderly Indian gentleman with a lot of experience in education, and Prabhupada put him in charge of the Vrindavan Gurukul, 77. So this youth, who was 30 years old at the time in 98, he said it was very sweet. And he said that sometimes Sometimes Dr. Sharma would slap us. Sometimes he would hit us. And when he hit us, we knew we deserved it, and we felt his love. It was a very sweet experience. In saying this, I'm not, I have 2 children who are now in their late 20s. I never hit my children, so it's not something I do. But he was saying, Dr. Sharma would sometimes hit us, and he said it, and we knew we deserved it. It was very loving. Okay. Then he described, Prabhupada passed away in November 77. He described then early in 78, this was his memory, then a new regime, it was the way he described it, was after the GBC meetings in 78, a new regime came in and they kicked out Dr. Sharma and his team. And the way he was like 9 years old at the time. The way he described it, it was like violent, like they were kicking on doors, banging on doors. Sharma was out, Yashoda Nandan was out, and they put in a new regime. You, Sanaka, would know the names better than me, okay? And then he said, from that day on, my childhood became a nightmare, okay? So, and of course, there was continued hitting, but so I'm not condoning hitting, but the point is, if Prabhupada gave some concession after being, pressured, yeah, because, the corporal punishment, this is not like an absolute thing not to do it, okay? And so, again, for me, I never did it. I don't condone it, this and that. But I'm making the point that Dr. Sharma had a loving consciousness. And even the child was saying, yeah, it was loving. And he did it for a reason to really help to educate us. And he loved us so much. And then just a few months later, it was a new regime. They were still hitting, same thing. No, then it was a nightmare, because then it was done with sadistic consciousness, malicious consciousness.
Yeah, no, when I went to Vrindavan Gurukul, Kurumarupa Prabhu was one of the teachers there, and he did hit the children sometimes. But as far as I'm aware, most of the children most of the students, they have a very loving and fond memories of Kurumarupa. And then shortly after Kurumarupa, somebody else came, and he had a very different consciousness, but also, it looks the same and it's very different.
Looks the same, but it's very different. Yep.
Yeah, it's indisciplined discipline, so to speak. I mean, I had corporal punishment at school. I was caned several times, once for swearing on a football field. It seemed a little over the top when I look back at it, but it was the culture in those days. But yes, we hear about ex-Marines throwing kids against walls, and that's a whole other category of, as you say, just vindictive violence. Probably prefer not to leave it on this note, but I'm mindful that we've already eaten into a good hour and a half, perhaps a little more now, hour and 3/4 of your time. So I don't want to keep you here against you. Well, thank you, anyone who has watched, and please share it if you think it's valuable. Please ask questions. If it's okay with you, Dhira Govinda Prabhu, we might tag you if there are any particular questions directed towards you. And hopefully, we'll continue this series of conversations that will hopefully apply a little bit of the pressure that we've spoken of, but in a way that elicits the right kind of response. Let's see. So far, we're still trying to get through to some GBC leaders to participate in these, and that is an unfortunate missing voice at the moment. So. Really appreciate you making the time, and as we say, the way in which you've conducted this interview and so on. So that being said, I might invite us to close down.
Thank you.
Thank you, Damodar. Thank you,
Hare Krishna. Thank you,
Hari Bolo.
Shanika. Thank you, Arjun. Thank you, Dhira Govinda Prabhuji.
Hari Bolo.
Hari Bolo.